awful lot of background noise in this room. Okay, go ahead. I can hear you. Go ahead. But I'll listen carefully.
And secondly, if I may, on Friday you said that you would be ready to take unprecedented fiscal action if necessary. I'm wondering what the preconditions would be for you to take that kind of action.
Important objective of the government.
Mr. Harper, I'd like to hear you speak in French on the comments of Mr. Lynn. That we could possibly go into a recession next year. What do you think of this verdict? And in a certain way, does it go against the predictions and assurances that you yourself gave Canadians a few weeks ago to predict recessions?
I'm just curious about a couple of things. Throughout your political career, of course, as Preston Manning's policy advisor, uniting the right, fighting 3 elections, federal elections as your leader, maintaining balanced budgets has been a core commitment, and clearly that's changed. So I wonder if you could just reflect on the political sales job that you and your government will now be engaged in as that has changed. And secondly, I'm curious about this term that you've been using, structural deficits. It sounds sort of like being technically pregnant. You either are in deficit or you aren't. What is a structural deficit, and how do you take to make sure that you don't go into whatever the structural deficit is?
We may recessionary conditions, but deflation, economic science, we know from the experiences of the 1930s of Canada decides along the line we can do that while preserving a structural in.
Hello, Mr. Harper. You say that you were surprised to learn. You say you were surprised to learn that Canada needed to go into a recession at the beginning of next year. Does that mean that you could accelerate the rhythm to which you will deploy these exceptional and unprecedented measures that you've been talking about for 2 days? We know that in the U.S. that a major rescue plan is being prepared. We would like to know, what do you expect? Well, don't you think it'll be too late? Even if we has now disappeared, and obvious eventuality.
Prime Minister, we now learn that the communique has been amended since yesterday to forecast that this global economic downturn can end in 18 months. I wonder how confident you are that that's true, whether you're even comfortable with having a timeline included in the declaration, and would you encourage Canadians to take that seriously? Does it mean anything given all the surprises that we've seen in the last few months?
As we set out coming out of Washington, undertake.
Continue with Alison Crawford at CBC.
You mentioned unprecedented fiscal stimulus. Can you give me an idea of what you're considering?
I'm not sure I do want to give you any additional detail today. As I say, we will, if it is necessary, for there to be government spending to bolster domestic consumption and to stimulate investment markets, we will undertake those measures. And we're obvious.
And we have time for one last question. Steve Rennie, Canadian Press.
Prime Minister, President-elect Obama has said that he'll be closing Guantanamo Bay, so he won't be speculating on this. Have Canadian officials been involved with talks with American officials either in Canada or in the United States about what will happen to Omar Khadr after Guantanamo is closed?
The reason
before saying that running a deficit is essential, so there is no doubt that we're going down that road.
None whatsoever. And by talking the gravity of the situation up, as he did in terms of the Great Depression of 1929, the Prime Minister is doing two things. He's preparing Canadians for the shock of very large deficits in the next few years and the need for them to stimulate economies. And also, he's telling Canadians, in effect, this is a global crisis and not one that his government can be blamed for.
Well, the other important thing to come out of this summit, Craig, is the fact that the leaders talked about avoiding trade barriers and protectionism. Now, how is that important to Canada?
It's important for everyone because the great fear now is that as the economies worsen, countries will put up trade barriers, walls, to protect their own jobs and industries, and that will deepen the stagnation. The hope is these dynamic economies like Japan and China, the second largest and third largest in the world, will be the ones to lead us out of this.